And I'm starting.
Welcome to those people that are joining at the moment. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for anyone else that might be joining us. All right, we might get started already. So just thank you so much for joining today. It's Scam Awareness Week, which happens every year. And the fund thought it was a great opportunity to use this for awareness for our members, because we know that, you know, we all get contacted by fraudsters. You know, we all know somebody who has been a victim of a scam. And so we just wanted to bring awareness and maybe provide some just general education around scams. We did ask prior to, while you were registering, to submit any questions. We will have time potentially at the end to answer some more questions that you might have. If we don't get to that, you can pop them in the chat box and we'll get back to you after today's session. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am today, the Wiradjuri people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to the traditional owners of the land on which you are on today. And I extend my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are joining us. Just for some context, so my name is Leah Bennett. I'm the Financial Crime Manager here at Australian Catholic Super. I've worked for over 10 years in the financial crime space, predominantly within banking, superannuation and the gaming industry. I started at the fund in March 2018. So we're going to go over some statistics. These statistics come from the ACCC ScamWatch website. These statistics are from the 2nd of November. So I encourage you to actually go onto the ScamWatch website. You can have a look there at, you know, common scams, most recent scams, and you can even play with the filters a little bit to break down individual scams and the financial figures. You can even break them down into age groups. So as of the 2nd of November, the total amount reported in Australia, and I will clarify that this was just the reported amount, so a lot of this does go unreported, was over $250 million. The number of reports were over 226,000. In 2020, the amount lost was over 175 million with 216,000 reports. So it has gone up significantly, especially when we think we're only at the beginning of November. It has gone up significantly since last year. Investment scams was the most reported scam, and it was responsible for over $114 million, followed by dating scams, which was over $37 million. Investment scams were up from last year. So last year's figures was 65 million. And we'll talk a little bit later on about investment scams and romance scams and why they are such a problem. We will talk as well about remote access scams. These continue to be an issue for people and are probably one of the most reported scams that come through our call centre that are reported by members. So we'll talk about that. It is still a problem, but the financial figure is significantly less. So, you know, it could range anywhere between like a couple of dollars to like a few $1,000s. Majority of the scams that were reported happened via phone. So we still see scams come in via the internet, and that can be through social media. Maybe a fraudster has sent out a phishing email to your email, but majority of those who had fallen victim to a scam reported that the contact happened via the phone. 88 reports came in about investment scams from the over 65 group, while the majority were between the age of 25 and 44. And I found this statistic really interesting because if you look at previous years, it was more, most people that reported that they were a victim of an investment scam actually were above the age group of 55. So it's interesting to see that this year that we're seeing people between the age of 25 and 44 falling victims to these scams. And that could be due to a number of factors happening, such as coronavirus and people losing their jobs. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about investment scams in the next slide. I also found this next one really interesting. So 57.2% of males and 42.1% of females reported a loss to the ACCC. However, females lost slightly more money, and that's a change from last year's statistics. So in previous years, we see that men report less, but they've actually lost more money. So it'll be interesting to see how that compares at the end of December when we can finalise those figures. So again, I want to touch on, there's so many scams that we can talk about, and these are probably the three main ones that I want to talk about: investment scams and romance scams, because that's where we see the most financial loss; remote access scams, because that's where our members are most impacted. So I'll actually start with remote access scams. So a remote access scam is basically when you're contacted by a third party who needs to access your computer. And the reasons why they may say that they need to access your computer may vary. It may change. It could be that, you know, they could say that they're calling from Microsoft and you have a virus on your computer and they need to access your computer to help you get rid of this virus. It could be somebody saying, you know, they're from Apple and there's an update that's required on your computer for security reasons, and they gain access to your computer. Generally, once they've gained access to your computer, there's two things that can happen. They can download a virus onto your computer that shows them everything, which means that they can gain access to your personal information, including your email, any documents you may have saved to your computer, things like that. The other thing is they may actually try to hold your computer hostage. So they may put software on your computer and say that they can't release, you know, that until you pay a certain amount of money. But in almost all cases, they ask you for money. So yeah, your computer does need this update and you'll have to pay $50. And they'll ask for your credit card information. Once they do that, they'll actually try to charge your card for as much as they possibly can. So while you're thinking that you're paying for, say, a $50, update on your computer to the software, or maybe to get some, a virus clean done on your computer, instead of charging $50, they might try thousands of dollars. It just depends on what's available on your card at that time, and they may make multiple attempts to continue to withdraw money from your account. In the instance that you do fall victim to a remote access scam, it's really important that you don't use your computer, that you switch that computer off, and that you take it to a professional to get looked at. Especially if they've put a virus onto the computer. You don't want to then go and do things like log on to your internet banking, make transactions, send emails, have copies of, things like your driver's license and passport. So it becomes really confusing, because the reasons why somebody may need to gain access to your computer will change. Fraudsters are really good. They started off just saying, hi, we're calling from Microsoft. There's a virus on your computer. We need to clean it. And then people started catching on to that, to them becoming a little bit more crafty. It's really important that you never allow anybody to access your computer under any circumstances, unless you can verify who they are. Now, if, say, for instance, you have an Apple computer and you've directly contacted Apple, say you've called their call center and said, there's a problem with my computer and I need help with that, or maybe your tablet or phone, in those instances, they may need to do that. But if you're receiving an unsolicited phone call from somebody saying that there is a virus or your computer requires an update, it's really important that you don't allow them to have access to your computer. In this instance, it's best just to terminate the phone call, and then you can maybe, say, for instance, call Apple and say, I've received this phone call, somebody's called me and said, I need an update, or I have a virus. Can you confirm whether or not that's the case? So with romance scams and investment scams, the reason why these two scams are the most common scams that we see with such high loss figures, I guess, is because they both involve emotional manipulation. So, for example, with romance scams, we often see what's called grooming. So the victim is groomed for a long period of time before they're even asked for money. So obviously, since coronavirus has happened, it's led people to date more online because they can't socialize outside like they normally would. There's also the convenience of being able to meet people online. So I'll talk a little bit about grooming and why that happens. So a case study, a lady meets a gentleman online and forms a relationship with this person. This person is traveling Europe for a couple of months, is on holidays with their family, and they start to form a relationship. The fraudster who is grooming the victim actually sends the victim gifts, things like flowers and bracelets, builds up a relationship and builds up trust with this person. That person then obviously starts to think, oh, okay, well, this is safe, even though I haven't met this person or, been able to see this person in real life. They obviously seem quite genuine. And then something small will happen. Say the person loses their wallet and they're in Europe somewhere and they need access to cash. So the victim then sends that person cash and the fraudster actually sends it back. So now they've built up trust. Okay, well, I've given this person money and they've actually given me that money back. So now there's that trust factor involved. And this might have happened multiple times over the course of a few months, where the fraudster might then ask for a larger sum of money and return that. Most of the time we make the assumption that a person has been speaking to somebody for 2 days and then asks them for $100,000. Generally, that's not the case when it comes to, losses of where people lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. Generally, it's a process over a few months. So then eventually it gets to the point where the fraudster has shown that they're trustworthy. that they still send them presents, that they return the money that they lend them, often quicker than they even say they're going to. And then some major crisis happens in their life, and they require a larger sum of money. And that's when the victim sends the money because the trust has been built, and then they don't hear from that person again. So it's really important that we remain mindful, especially with people in our lives. I know that there are people who know people who've been a part of romance scams, and they are quite common. But it's really important that if you haven't really met somebody in person and really built a relationship with them over a long period of time, that we aren't sending money to people that we don't know. And it is a really difficult situation when we talk about romance and building trust with another human being. And so that's why it's really important that we stay vigilant in these instances. Investment scams are quite similar in that sometimes it can be a financial planner, or it can be somebody posing as a financial planner, or somebody from an organization that can help you with your finances. And it's generally pressuring somebody or finding out their weakness first. So it could be that you're close to retirement age, and that person makes you feel like you're not going to have enough in retirement. So say, for instance, that person comes along and they say, I have X amount of money in my bank account and in superannuation, and the financial planner goes over, or the financial planner goes over, all their assets and their debt. And then they look at it and they go, you're going to have a really rough retirement. You're not going to have a comfortable retirement. You're not going to have enough that you need. But what I can do is I can get you to roll out your money, say, into a self-managed super fund, and have somebody manage that money for you and get you a really high return rate on your investment. It could be another investment opportunity, investing in stocks, or investing in housing, or something along those lines. And you would go, okay, well, let me think about that. I want to think about that situation. And they say, they then provide kind of a sense of urgency. So if you don't get on in this now, you're going to lose this opportunity, and it's not going to be available again. Just remember that you're not going to have enough money in retirement. Think about your family, think about your children. What kind of retirement do you want to be living? Do you want to be homeless? And they create insecurities with people to get them into a vulnerable state where you make decisions that you wouldn't normally do. So even going, I don't think this is the right opportunity for me. Let me have some time to think about it. You'll know that it's not right because they're putting pressure on you to make a decision right now. You've got to make this decision right now. This is not going to be available for you tomorrow, and they might start making excuses. Now, anybody who's a legitimate financial planner or somebody in the finance industry would never put that much pressure on somebody to make such a huge investment, or to make a huge financial decision that they didn't feel comfortable with. So it is really important to kind of assess the situation. Is this person making me feel safe and comfortable when it comes to my investments or my future? Because really, if you say, I really need time to think about this, or maybe I need to talk to my spouse about this decision, or I want to run this past somebody else, generally people should be like, well, that's okay, that's understandable, it is a huge investment, get back to me and let me know. So again, you can see the similarities in investment and romance scams is that it involves emotionally manipulating a person into feeling potentially insecure or safe, in a situation where they probably wouldn't. So we'll move on to just quickly, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. If anybody new has joined, if you have any questions that you want to ask. At the end of this as well, I'll actually put in my email address and our contact details. So if you want to contact me directly, and talk to me about anything that we've discussed here today, or you do have any concerns about any potential scams or fraud issues, you can reach out to me. I want to quickly touch on 3 most common scams that we find in the industry within superannuation. And we'll start off with early release of super. Now, early release of super is where you are gaining or getting access to your superannuation before preservation age. And the government is really strict on when you can access your money. So that might be that you've been on Centrelink and unemployed for a certain period of time. It could be that you fall under compassionate reasons. Maybe you need urgent surgery, you need to help pay your mortgage, things like that. And so you have to meet certain criteria in order to be able to gain early release of super. And so I will say, first of all, if anyone ever does approach you about accessing your super early, under compassionate grounds or early release of super, that it's really important that you check the criteria under the ATO about whether or not you are eligible. All super funds will always make sure that you have appropriate paperwork, that everything is there and that it has been approved by the government prior to paying out. But the reason why we still see scams and fraud happening within early release of super is that sometimes fraudsters can manipulate paperwork, Photoshop paperwork to make it look legitimate. Now, there are ways in which we can verify with government departments such as Centrelink and the ATO the legitimacy. I would say that we as a fund haven't received any of these cases, but we know that they happen within the industry itself. So it depends a lot on the individual processes of a super fund, but we will generally make sure that your paperwork is complete and that everything is there before processing it. But fraudsters can contact you and say, I can help you gain early release of super, maybe under compassionate grounds. Do you have an illness or something along those, do you fall into any of these categories? Do you need to make mortgage repayments? And they can actually help you falsify documents in order to gain early release of super. The problem is that if you do gain early release of super and you are not eligible to do that, there are repercussions for that come tax time and if the government does find out about it. So that's a common scam that happens within superannuation. I'm going to quickly go over to self-managed super fund scams because, again, these are probably a really common scam that happen within the industry. Luckily, we don't see too many of them here at the fund, but generally it's a fraudster, pretending to be a financial planner who may actually help you set up a legitimate self-managed super fund. They may be able to say, I've got, some great areas where we can put your money into and help you invest in particular ways, maybe purchase a property. I can help you through the entire process for a really small fee. And they may actually, like I said, set up a legitimate self-managed super fund, but they may have access to the bank account itself. And in that case, we have seen that fraudsters have then gained access to those funds and have then sent them to another financial institution and then potentially offshore. Once it gets to that point where the fraudster has full control over a self-managed super fund and the bank account where the money has gone to, once it goes overseas, it becomes incredibly difficult for your financial institution to get that money back. Even if it's just gone to another financial institution within Australia, there's a really long process of trying to get that money back into the super fund. So it's really important that you're doing a lot of research into the financial planners, the accountants, the people that you're dealing with when trying to set up a self-managed super fund. And if you're a little bit unsure and you don't know, the best thing that you can do is contact us directly to help support you in that process. The next one is the Your Future, Your Super scam. So Your Future, Your Super came out a couple of months ago, and straight away we've started to see members calling us to say, I've had somebody contact me. They said that I've received a Your Future, Your Super letter about my fund's performance. What this is phishing. So fraudsters are really good at keeping up to date with trends and things that are happening, in Australia, especially in the financial sector. And so I guess what's happened is they've gone your future, your super. Let's see how many people actually receive one of those letters. So I'll give you an example. A fraudster sends out maybe 100,000 emails, or maybe they make 100 phone calls, and they say, I know you've received a Your Future, Your Super email, or, letter from your superannuation. Maybe 80% of those people didn't receive a Your Future, Your Super letter from their superannuation fund, and maybe 20% of them have. So then you've got 20%. And maybe 10% say, look, I'm not interested. I don't want to talk to you about this, and hang up the phone, or they don't respond to their email. But then you still have 10% of people that are willing to have a conversation, or maybe want to find out more. And that's phishing. It's casting a net, see who's interested, who gets caught in that net, and then trying to pull them back in. Now, luckily, all the people who have reported this actually ended the phone call, but I thought it was really important to share with you how quickly fraudsters, come up with new ideas to get people in and interested, so that they can try and take your money. And it was, from what we know so far, it was conversations that went, we know that you've received a Your Future, Your Super letter about your fund's performance. We can help you transfer your money to another super fund, or potentially set up a self-managed super fund. So it's really important too that we all take accountability and responsibility to be aware of what's going on around us. What kind of scams are going on. I know me personally, I know I work in financial crime, so it's easy for me to say, oh, I'm up to date on this stuff. But I do generally like to see what else is happening out there outside of superannuation that might not directly impact me. But sometimes it will be just going on to Scam Watch and seeing what's popping up. So how can you help identify a scam? So be mindful of seasonal scams, and that kind of goes into what I was just talking about. Be mindful about what's going on. During coronavirus, we've seen a lot of scams happening around coronavirus. People being out of work, we can help you get access to early release of super under the COVID scheme. Fraudsters were all over it. We see a lot of scams around tax time. I can get you back a bigger and better tax return than you normally would. Christmas scams. There's a lot of pet scams where you see people advertising, purebred puppies that you can give your kids at Christmas. On Gumtree, only you put down a deposit for this puppy that never arrives, or that you can never actually pick up. So be mindful of what's happening at the moment. What type of season is it? Is this, consistent with what we've seen, on Scam Watch or in previous years? And I know this is so overused. It seems too good to be true. It probably is. It's really important to keep that in the back of your mind. If you don't think that this opportunity normally would have come up, it's really important that you question that. And that's not to say that sometimes good things happen and sometimes they're legitimate, but it might be an indication that you might need to do a little bit more research. Again, pressure and emotional manipulation. Someone who's generally interested in making sure that you're safe and that you've got the best retirement outcome, or that you're financially secure, is not going to emotionally manipulate you or pressure you into something. Unsolicited contact is a big one, and I know that we're all, over the last few months received a lot of text messages and phone calls from scammers and fraudsters. Generally, a lot of the time, if you don't deal with that organisation, you just need to be really cautious of the interactions that you're having. Somebody calling you who's trying to gain personal or financial information. Now, I do want to make a disclaimer. Sometimes here at the fund, we will try to contact our members. It could be to welcome you to our fund and to see if you had any questions for us and needed assistance. Maybe you've submitted an application to withdraw some money. Maybe it's to, set up a pension account, something along those lines. We may need to contact you about that and get some personal information from you. If you don't feel safe in those situations and you can't confirm 100% I'm speaking to somebody from Australian Catholic Super, or I'm 100% speaking to somebody from my financial institution, the best thing to do is just explain that you don't feel comfortable giving your personal information over the phone, and if it's okay if you give them a call back. Every time I've spoken to a member and they don't want to give me their personal information, I really encourage them that what they're doing is the right thing, and that they can call into our call centre, to go onto our website, find our phone number, call into the call centre and say, I'd like to speak with Leah. She tried to call me earlier. So again, if you don't feel comfortable and you can't be sure that the person you're speaking to is from the place that they're saying they're from, just tell them that you'll give them a call back. Threat to life. There are scams where people threaten people's lives. It could be, I've held somebody in your family hostage. This even extends to, there was a period of time where there were scams going around where, people who weren't from Australia, immigrants were being told that they were going to be deported if they didn't pay a fee. So anything relating to this, it's really important that you kind of just terminate the phone call. So, and as I mentioned before, search the ACCC scam website to see if it's a known scam. So if you've had an interaction with somebody and you're not sure whether or not it's a legitimate, person from an organisation, go to Scam Watch and see whether or not that's a scam that's come up previously, or maybe even Google it to see whether or not there's anybody in a forum talking, because people do that. I received a phone call from somebody the other day saying they were from here, and you can search and sometimes it will come up. What do you do if you fall victim? So it's all good and well that we talk about, how to avoid scams, but sometimes they're just too good at what they do. If it's possible, terminate the call or interaction. So the reason I say terminate is because if you start having a conversation about how you don't feel safe or you don't know if they're legitimate, you're giving them the opportunity to convince you that they are. So tell me, why are you worried? Why are you concerned that I might not be from this place? We need to remember that, you're a teacher for a living. I'm a financial crime manager for a living. We do this for a living. We've probably done this for a really long time. We're probably really good at what we do. Fraudsters are also really good at what they do, and they do this for a living. So having conversations and how to convince you that they are who they are is something that they do on a regular basis. If you feel unsafe and unsure, the best thing to do is just terminate the call. Now, if you have gotten to the part where you've provided personal information, notify your financial institutions immediately, and that includes your super funds. So not just your banks, but your super funds. You need to notify everybody of what's happened. It also depends on how much personal information you've provided. If you've provided your full name, address, and date of birth, I would still notify those people, the financial institutions and your superannuation funds. If you have given things like your identification numbers, maybe your credit card information, immediately contact your financial institution so they can put a stop. While you're waiting on the phone to your financial institution, log into your internet banking and try and transfer money out of there into a safe account where that card's not connected. If there's any financial loss, report it to the police. Now, I'm not saying if there isn't a financial loss, you don't need to report it to the police. It definitely depends on the circumstances. It just depends on how much time you have. Generally, if there's a financial loss, you should report it to the police and notify them and let them know, because it could be a part of a bigger systemic issue that's going on, and it's important that they're aware of that. And if you haven't had financial loss, it's completely up to you. But if there is no financial loss, there are other avenues you can go down for reporting. For example, the ACCC. So you can actually go onto the ACCC Scam Watch website and actually make a report on there and report what's happened and the type of scam. This is actually really helpful because it makes us more informed about what's going on Australia-wide, how people are being impacted and how we can prevent people from being, further negatively impacted. If the scam involved in identity theft, you can make a report to idcare.org. idcare.org will actually, you'll put a report online and someone will actually get in contact with you to help you through the process. That might be giving you additional support and services on what else you can do. If you've given your tax file number over to somebody, immediately contact the ATO and advise them that that has happened. If it's Centrelink credentials that you might have, you'll need to contact Centrelink. But if it is, your driver's license, your passport, even your tax file number, it's really important that you go onto idcare.org and report it to them, and they can give you additional assistance. So that comes to the end of our session. I know that that's a lot of information and you're probably going, oh, I have more questions, or, maybe I want to find out more information about a different scam. If that's the case, like I mentioned earlier, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact us through the contact centre and say, I would like to speak with Leah. I have a situation that I need to talk to her about. You don't need to divulge all the information to the person that you speak in the call centre. You can just say, I have some concerns and I would like to get some advice from Leah, and they'll pop you through to me. If you want to contact me directly, you can contact me at financialcrime@catholicsuper.com.au, and our office hours are also available on our website. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope that you've learned something and you got something out of today's session. And like I've mentioned, go onto the Scam Watch website, and I hope that you're able to take something that you've learned today and share it with some other people, maybe within your family. So thank you.